Hey guys, it's Morgan Zegers with Educate Freedom, and today I'm going to walk you through how you and your family can learn to debunk some really common myths out there said by socialists in America today. So let's get started. Number one is super common that you're going to hear, but it's also very quick and easy to debunk. A lot of socialists will say something like, socialism gives power to the people. And they'll say stuff like, under socialism, everything's going to be community owned or owned by the people, or it's going to be owned by the workers or publicly owned. They have a bunch of these nice sounding phrases, but the reality here is that under socialism, the government is taking control of the economy in the country. Okay, so no longer will any people, any average citizens like you and me, no longer will they be able to have a decision in how they participate in the economy. The government becomes basically the boss, and they run all of the businesses, industries, everything, and they tell everybody what to do. Now, the important and dangerous part of this is that when you control the financial and economic aspects of everybody's lives, including how they get necessary things that are needed to survive every day, like food and healthcare and shelter, everything, even employment, you pretty much control every aspect of their life. Financial and economic independence is very, very important to preserve an individual's personal freedoms. And so under socialism, when the government takes over the economy, they are basically taking control of everybody's lives, and it's very, very dangerous. So the people have no power, even though they sometimes say it's owned by the people. The reality is that the government now owns and controls everything, but they might just say, but we manage it in the people's name, or we manage it for the people. You guys own everything, but we're just gonna handle all that stuff. It doesn't make sense. All right, now let's move on to myth number two. Sometimes socialists will say stuff like, under socialism, we're gonna have this perfect world where everything is free and provided by the government for free. This gets dangerous as well because you still need people to perform labor to provide every basic necessity in life and to keep society running. Think of like agriculture and the food systems, the healthcare system, the structure of government, law enforcement, everything. Every important job that keeps society running still has to be done. But all of this slowly starts to crumble because the government is now in charge of all of it. Now, the dangerous thing here is that when you don't have a market economy, when you don't have proper pricing because of basic economics being taken away from the system, you have this situation where the government is running out of money. They're providing everything to the people for free. Lack of resources starts to set in. You see shortages, rationing, and then what does the government end up doing? They start forcing people to work for no pay or very little pay, and you start to see forced slave labor take place in the country because the economy has collapsed, but you still need to keep things going. How do you do that? You force people to do the jobs that they at least would have been paid to do if this was still a situation of a market economy and people had economic independence and were able to participate in the economy however they wanted. That's not the case anymore. Now let's move on to number three. Number three is one of my favorite ones, actually. It's when people like AOC, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and the rest of the American socialists, they say things like, but we're democratic socialists, and that's different than the other socialism. It's not as bad. I've also been on college campuses where I've heard socialists explain that in America, you are going to be able to democratically elect the socialists into power, so that makes it democratic socialism. The quick way to debunk this is that no matter how a socialist comes to power, whether they were democratically elected, like in a country, Venezuela, that democratically elected Hugo Chavez, who became a socialist dictator, it didn't matter how Hugo Chavez came to power. He was democratically elected, he implemented economic socialist policies, the country collapsed and very quickly became a socialist dictatorship with a dictatorial regime, and that regime ended up oppressing massively the people of the country, and they're starving and they're struggling massively. This wasn't because, he came to power in a non-democratic way. He literally did come to power by being elected. But the point is that he implemented socialist economic policy. So no matter how you get in power, what matters is that you're implementing failure policies, and it's going to ruin and destroy the country. And that leads to what happens down the road, where a dictatorial regime can rise up. People always say, why do you bring up Venezuela so much? It's because it's a great example of what happens when you vote socialism into office. It still destroys the country. And on top of that, you have Americans advocating for socialism today, saying, because we are going to elect him, it's going to be different, and we're going to be able to keep our republic, but also have socialist economic policies. But they cannot exist at the same time. Socialism will strip the American citizens of all of their financial and economic power, which is a huge component of personal liberty, and that really kind of takes away the whole essence of our constitutional republic, where we are supposed to have the power. We are the ones that make the government. But We can get into that later. All right, let's move on to myth number 4. A lot of socialists in America will say something like, if we try socialism in America today, it's gonna look a lot more like Nordic Europe, and it's not gonna look anything like Venezuela. So you're gonna notice as we go through the myths that a lot of them kind of touch on the same talking points and can be debunked in the same way. This one, once again, they bring up Venezuela, but let's talk about the Nordic Europe lie first. So socialists in America try and stay away from the actual realities of what has happened when countries in the past have tried socialism. They do not want to talk about Cuba, they don't want to talk about Venezuela, they don't want to talk about the USSR. They say, oh no, those aren't the kind of socialism we're going to implement, we're going to look like Nordic Europe. The reality here, though, is that Nordic Europe is not socialist. The countries that are being referenced by American socialists are not socialist. They are countries with market economies, private economies, but also huge government programs and very high taxes. And it's really important to understand that that is different. Just a country having a market economy with very high taxes and huge government programs, that is different than implementing economic socialist policies where the government takes over all or some of the major industries in the country. So you have economic socialist policies, or you can have high taxes and huge programs with a private economy where people are still given economic independence. Now, I will say the policies that we see in Nordic Europe, I don't think they are sustainable. There's many cases showing that those high taxes and huge programs are not sustainable in the long run, but at the end of the day, they are called social democracies, not democratic socialism, not socialism. So if you ever have a socialist in America tell you that their socialism is going to make us look like Nordic Europe, you can easily debunk that by explaining what I just said. Now, kind of going back to how they want to reject any connection to real socialism being implemented, they will always use that common phrase of, oh, you guys always talk about Venezuela. Why do you do that? Why don't you talk about Nordic Europe? It's because Nordic Europe is not socialist, and Venezuela is a very recent, this happened in the early 2000s, you have a very recent example of a country that was very resource rich, very oil rich. You had average middle class people in that country who had their entire lives turned upside down when they democratically elected a socialist into power and they implemented economic socialist policies. We reference that country all the time because it's a perfect example of what could happen in America. I also just want to add in before we move on here, the socialists that claim they are going to make America look like Nordic Europe are lying to you in an even more deceitful way than you probably first assumed. They don't have policies that will make us look like Nordic Europe. They, when you actually read their policy proposals, when you look at what their websites actually say, when you hear what their goals are in terms of policies for our country, they are true socialist policies where the government takes over major parts of the economy or all parts of the economy. So do not be tricked by this. When you read what they actually want, it does not sound like anything close to what Nordic Europe has. Let's move on to myth number 5. Sometimes you're going to hear socialists and communists tell you that real socialism has just never been tried before. It's never been successfully achieved because it's always been interrupted or something. Now, this is absolutely ridiculous. One of the things that you're going to hear a lot is they're going to say, well, it's just always these evil dictators come in and they ruin the socialist movement, and the true Marxists and socialists that envisioned the revolution where everybody would live in this beautiful utopian society, they got squashed by these dictators that weren't very good leaders, and that's why it failed. It kind of ignores the fact that the socialist revolution, the talking points, the Marxist division that's created in society, and of course the actual seizing of the means of production where the government takes over the economy, all of those factors end up empowering a socialist dictator to come and be put in charge and then become this tyrannical dictator with a crazy amount of power, and that's how it just goes downhill from there. And so it's not that socialism's just never been able to be tried, it's that the socialists have this nice little paper of the steps that they're going to use, right? They're going to come into power, and then everybody's going to pool their assets and their resources together, and it's going to be perfect, and then everything's going to be evenly distributed, and the people will peacefully run and organize and control everything together. It's just that when they get to that part where they start implementing their little checklist that looks super nice on paper, the actual realities and the impacts of doing that, of taking everybody's things by force and then redistributing them and then putting the government in charge of everything, that leads to a society collapsing, the economy collapsing, massive societal chaos, and then a power vacuum where a dictatorial regime can set in. So if they ever say that socialism's just never been able to be tried before, just let them know, oh no, it gets tried, it only just gets a few steps into their little checklist, and it fails, and it opens the door for a dictatorship. Another thing you're going to hear, myth number 6, is socialists complain that it's not fair how under capitalism you have to work to survive. This is really ignorant, I would say, of just all human history. Labor is something that all humans have had to do, and unfortunately, throughout human history, we've seen some really bad relationships of what it looks like for people in power to be in control of how other people labor underneath them. I mean, we've seen slavery, we've seen serfdom, we've seen some really, really gruesome displays of how humans have created relationships between work, labor, and pay. The most empowering and most free and most successful system that has ever existed is to give the people of a country economic independence combined with personal liberty. That's what we have here in America. In America, we have a constitution that protects our free will, protects our God-given rights, and then also gives us the ability to participate in the economy in any way that we desire, any way that we choose. That is a powerful combination. On top of that, we also have a limited government. Now, I'm not a big government person, right? I'm not advocating for absolute anarchy with no government, but I'm also not advocating for burdensome government regulations. I will say, though, that it's important to stress to people who are maybe upset about capitalism and they have stories of the Industrial Revolution that they always reference. It's important to show them that, hey, legislation does get passed when anybody is caught doing a wrong thing. We have a system of law and order, we have a system of justice, and people that harm others usually will be held accountable. And this is important to address with them because, of course, you're going to hear a ton of complaints about capitalism. What we have to understand is that there is a big difference between people in a society enjoying the fruits of economic independence and the freedom that comes with it. That's a very important thing. There's a big difference between that and the cronyism that we see in America's economic system and political system today. Cronyism is when people in politics, people in government, so politicians, all the consultants, all the bureaucrats, everybody at the top works together behind the scenes with all the people at the top of big corporations, and they make deals and legislation and all these policies that really only benefit themselves and get themselves rich. And us average people at the bottom, we have no say in it. We're so frustrated by it. We pay so much in taxes. We see so little come back to us and to our communities, and we just see all these people at the top kind of looking down at us. That is a system of cronyism. And as a conservative, I definitely want to fight against that. But it's really harmful right now because American students are being taught that this corrupt system that we have these days is just capitalism. And so the only solution to this mess right now that's called capitalism is to just try socialism, where we wouldn't have all this greed and all these corrupt, dirty business dealings. What they don't get taught in schools is that it's actually the government, it's the politicians, it's the people behind the scenes in our bureaucracy that are rigging the system against average people like you and me and picking the winners and losers with government power to help big businesses. We have to talk to them about how it's important to fight that corrupt system, but that doesn't mean we just embrace socialism that gives government full and complete control of everything in the economy. Instead, we have to get back to our roots, which was a system of equality and of fairness and a system of law and justice that holds bad actors accountable, but also protects our ability to have freedom and economic independence, because average people like you and me benefit the most. All improves when we have freedom economically and financially. On top of that, it's really important to stress to them that under socialism, you're still going to have to work, and not even that, the government is going to be your boss. Instead of you having choice in terms of how you participate in the economy, what job you would like to do, what career, what kind of work relationship you want to have with your private life in terms of how many hours, and do you want to do a full-time job, do you want to do a contract work, do you want to be a small business owner? All of that is taken away from you. So it might be frustrating sometimes for young people to look at all the bills that they have to pay, all the taxes, all the expenses of life, and say, gosh, I'm just trying to live and pay for food and pay for basics. Why do I have to work? It seems immoral. But just stress to them, there's really nothing wrong. It's actually very empowering to be able to trade your skills and your work, your time, for money that you can then use to pay to sustain your life and to take care of yourself and your family and grow in your personal private life. It's all up to you, and it's very empowering to be able to have that kind of freedom. Under socialism, you will still have to work, trust me, and it's going to be a lot harder than it is under a capitalist system. All right, let's get into myth number 7. Sometimes you're going to hear socialists say that under capitalism or under a market economy, it's just not fair because it's all based on greed. And when someone succeeds, another person has to lose. When someone gains something, somebody else is losing something. There's a video that always comes to mind of this, of Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez speaking to a crowd and telling the crowd of young people that the bosses at a factory where widgets are made just sit in the office on their butts and they wait for the people in the factory, the actual workers, to make the widgets. And then when they sell the widgets, the bosses steal the profits from the workers who actually made the products and deserve the profits. And so when we highly tax billionaires, or when we take money away from billionaires with socialist policies, we're actually just taking the money back that they stole in the first place. That's her little word game that she uses to twist the narrative, okay? What's important to understand here is that as an employee, if you are working, you are trading your time, your experience, and your labor for a certain amount of money. And you entered into that agreement willingly, consensually, with that boss, okay? You were not forced to be there. And you are there because you agreed to be there in the first place. Your experience, your time is going to be paid appropriately according to what you contribute. The boss is not stealing from you. The boss actually worked really hard to establish the business. He maintains all of the expenses. He handles all of the management, and that comes with its own roles. And so I personally think a really strong way to talk to our kids about this one is to explain to them how a basic business runs. I personally like to use an example of like an ice cream shop where you can just explain to them how much it probably costs to run 2 people that are there scooping the ice cream, how much it costs to rent out the ice cream business or own the building, how much it costs to make the ice cream itself with all the ingredients, the cone, the napkin that comes with it. And then you could do a little calculation and say, okay, so based on this, it costs this much to sell 1 ice cream cone. He's going to sell it for this much and there's going to be a profit, but now he has to pay for those workers, so what is he left with? On top of that, a business owner is also probably going to reinvest that money back into the business to grow it. So when we talk to kids about this and when we open their minds up to the potential that they too could be a business owner, and this is how you would do it on a very basic level, it also helps humanize business owners, and it takes away the left's ability to say that any business owner is stealing profit from the factory workers making the widgets. I mean, that was probably one of the most communist things I've ever heard AOC say. It still makes my skin crawl. All right, moving on to myth number 8. Sometimes socialists will say stuff like, the Constitution is just super old and it needs to be updated to fit modern times. A classic tactic of radical leftists when they're coming to power is to change the constitutional documents of a country. They want to do things like pack the court. They want to do things like take away protective measures and security measures in place to provide checks on power. It's very dangerous. And let me just say, our founders, you can read the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers if you would like. You definitely should with your kids. But our founders looked through all of human history that they could have been aware of at the time, and they did an evaluation of every republic, democracy, and attempt at representative government that had been tried before, and they looked at why it failed. And then they wrote into the United States government the proposal for the Constitution. They said, okay, now knowing these things, what can we write into the United States Constitution to make sure that we last, to make sure that we are a republic that lasts for a very long time, that withstands the test of time? And that's how we ended up with our system of government. So to act like our Constitution is archaic, when in reality it is what our founders created after studying thousands and thousands of years of human history, is pretty naive, pretty ignorant. One of the most important parts of the American structure of government is the fact that it is focused on decentralized power. We are a constitutional republic focused on federalism. So all of the states came together at the founding of our country and said, we are going to agree to create a federal government to keep us all tied, to keep us all united. That's how the republic came to be. It wasn't that a bunch of people made a federal government and then states formed. No. Our founders specifically wanted these states to help create a decentralized government that could help keep everybody together and focused on one unique cause. There was many reasons for why they did this, but the important thing to remember here is that socialism centralizes power into the hands of the government by giving the government full economic and financial control of the people and all industries, all businesses in that country. That is major centralization of power. It is literally the antithesis of what our founders want and intended for our country, so please learn that lesson. And actually, just to throw in this last myth, sometimes you'll hear people on both sides of the aisle interchangeably use the words socialism and communism. But this is one myth that we can debunk quickly. Socialism is the economic system that many people say is the required step to get to communism. Communism is when the government controls literally everything. Like, it's insane. Now, you need to implement economic socialist policies to get to communism, because implementing economic socialist policies means the government is put fully in charge of the economy. They control how everybody gets everything. Every financial financial and economic aspect of your life, of your family, is going to be controlled by the government now. So yeah, that kind of empowers the government to then be able to move into communism, where they control every other aspect of your life. You guys, thank you so much for watching. This was the video version of lesson number 5 for our free 5-lesson curriculum packet all about how to teach your kids about socialism. If you haven't gotten it yet, please go to our website, educatefreedom.org, and it is, again, free. Please go do that now. We're here to serve you. We want to make this journey for your family as simple, easy, and effective as possible. Thanks for tuning in.